So let's talk about triangles. Let's talk about mathematics. Let's talk about geometry, and let's try to figure out why Descartes is talking about these things in Meditation 5. One thing we should, of course, keep in mind is that Descartes was a mathematician. He was a very, very important mathematician, and had he never written a word about philosophy, he would still be one of the intellectual giants of history because of his work in mathematics. And he also did a lot of work in physics, which is very, very interesting and very good work. Maybe didn't hold up as well in the modern period, but so it's quite natural for him to talk about mathematics. It's really his field. It's what he says on page 143 in the second paragraph. In the first place, I distinctly imagine that quantity, which the philosophers commonly call continuous, or the extension in length, breadth, and depth that is in this quantity, or rather in the object to which it is attributed. Extension, quantity, number, the very stuff of mathematics, lines, figures, numbers, ratios. This is what the mathematicians work with. And he says of them, and I not only distinctly know these things when I thus consider them in general, but besides, by little attention, I discover innumerable particulars respecting figures, numbers, motions, and the like, which are so evidently true and so accordant with my nature, that when I now discover them, I do not so much appear to learn anything new as to call to remembrance what I before knew, or for the first time to remark what was before in my mind. And he goes on to talk about certain characteristics of the triangle. For example, when I imagine a triangle, although there is not perhaps, and never was, in any place in the universe apart from my thought one such figure, it remains true, nevertheless, that this figure possesses a certain determinate nature, form, or essence, which is immutable and eternal and not framed by me, nor in any degree dependent upon my thought, as it appears in the circumstances that diverse properties of the triangle may be demonstrated. Proof, we can demonstrate that, for instance, the triangle has three angles, interior angles, that are equal to two right angles. That its greatest side is subtended by its greatest angle. And later on he talks about things that are less obvious about the triangle, or the right triangle, for instance, the Pythagorean theorem and things like that. That these truths about the triangle, even if we don't consider that the triangle has any existence apart from Descartes' mind, he says, there are certain aspects of it, certain things about it, which seem to be so true and clear and distinct that they couldn't be nothing. That is, he says at a certain point, they couldn't be negations, they couldn't be mere nothings. That they are clear and distinct and true, and so they must belong to some being, to something. So what's he getting at here? Well, he's getting at mathematics and the idea that if anything is clear and distinct besides his own existence, that he's a thinking thing, the existence of God, etc., those things it's that the truths of mathematics are true. That is, that they are certain, that they are real, that they indicate something real. But remember that mathematics, from a theoretical point of view, that mathematics does not actually deal with things, physical things in the world. It can be applied to those things. But the truths of mathematics are conceptual. They are ideal. He says at a certain point, sure, I know things about triangles, but I didn't get the concept of the triangle, or it doesn't rely, at least, upon my experience of particular triangular things I've experienced, because I can prove all sorts of things about figures that I've never seen, many, many-sided figures, not common ones like triangles. So what has he got out of this? That he can be sure of his knowledge of the basic insights of mathematics, and not just things about geometry, about shapes, but also about number and things like that. This is quite important because, of course, if he's eventually going to get to some knowledge of the physical world, of physical things, that mathematics will be a part of that, because, of course, although mathematics apparently doesn't rely upon these physical things for its own existence, it certainly does apply to them, and there may be certain mathematical characteristics of physical things in the world. So, again, after this discussion, we go back to a discussion again of God. And the discussion of God in this context, Descartes has said of mathematical things that if he can see so clearly into some of their characteristics, for instance, those previously mentioned characteristics of a triangle, then in some way or another the triangle must exist. And he relates this to his knowledge of God. That is, if he can see so clearly into some aspects of God, that God in some sense must exist. And a lot of this has to do with the relationship between the existence and the essence of God. He says on page 145, second paragraph, "But now, if because I can draw from my thought the idea of an object, it follows that all I clearly and distinctly apprehend to pertain to this object does in truth belong to it, may I not from this derive an argument for the existence of God?" And he goes into a discussion of the attribute that he most clearly conceives of in God, and that is his perfection and his existence. And what we get is a meditation on the idea that God's existence and his essence are the same. That is, that this should harken back to Anselm, the notion that God is a necessary being because his existence is implied in his essence. The idea of a perfect being who must exist. If a being is perfect, that being must exist because existence as a perfection would have to be included in the idea of that being, so that if the being didn't exist, it would not be a perfect being, etc. I don't want to get us too much into these further proofs of God's existence and the problems associated with existence being part of essence and things like that. I'm more interested here in where exactly does this get Descartes, again, proving more firmly the existence of God. If we look in the bottom of page 149, the last paragraph, he says, "But after I have discovered that God exists, seeing I also at the same time observe that all things depend upon him, and that he is no deceiver, and thence infer that all which I clearly and distinctly perceive is of necessity true, although I no longer attend to the grounds of a judgment, no opposite reason can be alleged sufficient to lead me to doubt of its truth, provided I only remember that I once possessed a clear and distinct comprehension of it. My knowledge of it thus becomes true and certain." Again, Descartes asserts that God is no deceiver. This God, who he's more and more clearly bringing out in terms of the concepts associated with God, couldn't be an absolute deceiver. And that the existence of this God, again, as an epistemological function, that the existence of this God vouchsafes, guarantees to a certain extent the certitude that Descartes feels that he can have for certain parts of his knowledge. Now, where is he at this point? Well, he's certainly not at the point at the end of Meditation 5 where he can say, oh yeah, okay, a physical world is around me and my ideas, at least some of them, come from or relate to that physical world. But he's certainly at a point where he's recovered mathematics, that is, and he doesn't have to remember the proof of the demonstration of every mathematical truth to be certain of it. All he has to do is remember, and God being no deceiver, he can faithfully remember, or legitimately, or reliably remember that he once proved it, so he can be certain of certain things that he proved or demonstrated in the past. So he's got his knowledge of mathematics, which includes number and ratios and extension, magnitude, the whole idea of measuring lines and shapes and things like that. And we'll see in Meditation 6, where does that actually get him?